The first time it happened, he did not pay much attention. Their bodies were still warm, the rhythm of their breaths still uneven, their skin glowing with the faint trace of sweat. He was lying back against the sheets, heart still racing from the fire that had just consumed them. She was pressed against him for a moment, her fingers tracing his chest, as if savoring the last pulse of passion. Then, without a word, she slipped out of bed, pulled the silk robe over her shoulders, and walked across the room. He thought she was heading for the bathroom, but then he heard it, the soft click of a lock. The sound was not from the bathroom door. It came from the study next to their bedroom. He frowned, curious, but the afterglow of love was still heavy on him. He let it pass. When she returned 20 minutes later, her face was calm. Her hair still tousled her lips, soft with the memory of their kisses. She slid back into bed, kissed his temple gently, and whispered good night as if nothing unusual had happened. He smiled, hugged her back, and let sleep take him. At that moment, it was nothing more than a passing detail. But the second time, the action repeated, and the third, and the fourth. Every night after their intimacy, she would rise robe around her body and disappear into the study. Every time the sound of a key turning echoed faintly. And every time she returned with that same serene face, lying down beside him like the most devoted lover, as if the locked door did not exist. For him it was confusing. He was a man who had lived through the noise of the world, a billionaire whose name echoed in headlines and boardrooms. Yet in the quiet of this bedroom, he was only a man longing for closeness. He wanted her warmth, her vulnerability, the soft chaos that followed love. But she built a wall every night, one made not of bricks or words, but of silence and a locked door. He told himself not to overthink. Everyone had habits. Some people drank water before sleep. Others prayed, others checked their phones obsessively. Maybe this was hers. But something about the way she moved, the deliberate calmness, the way she lingered in that study unsettled him. It felt less like a habit and more like a ritual. One night curiosity lingered stronger than usual. Their love had been slow and tender, the kind that left a man aching not only for her body, but for her soul. As she slipped away once more, his chest tightened. He wanted to ask to pull her back into his arms, but instead he watched her silhouette disappear through the door. He heard the lock again, the faint metallic click. Minutes passed. He could not sleep. He sat up staring at the dim light that glowed faintly under the door of the study. He imagined her sitting inside, surrounded by shadows, perhaps writing something, perhaps reading letters, perhaps talking to someone else. The thought of another man touched his mind for a moment and left a bitter taste on his tongue. He shook it off, but it returned, nagging relentless. When she finally came back, he looked at her closely. Her eyes seemed softer, almost sad, though her lips carried a reassuring smile. She touched his cheek, as if trying to calm his storm. He forced a smile, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her hair. But inside, questions brewed. The next morning, as sunlight spilled into their room, he considered bringing it up. He almost asked her over breakfast while she poured tea into his cup and hummed softly. But her calm presence disarmed him. She looked so ordinary, so gentle, so untouched by secrets, that he swallowed the question. He told himself, not yet, not today. Yet by the end of the week, he could no longer ignore it. They made love intense and fiery, leaving both of them breathless. When she rose once more, her movements graceful and unhurried. He asked gently, almost playfully, "What do you always do in that study?" She paused for half a second, then smiled. "Nothing serious, just small things. You know I need a little time alone after. Is that strange?" He chuckled, trying to hide the tension in his voice. "Strange, maybe, but you know people usually want to be closer, afterward, not farther." She leaned down, kissed his lips softly, and whispered, "Do not worry, I always come back to you." Then she slipped away again, leaving him with the sound of that lock, a sound that now echoed louder than it should. That night he stayed awake longer than usual listening. He pressed his ear closer to the wall between their bedroom and the study. At first there was silence. Then faintly he heard a rustle, like paper being unfolded. A whisper followed, low, steady, rhythmic, as if she was reading something or reciting a prayer. His pulse quickened. He wanted to get up, knock, demand answers. But he stayed still, his heart thundering in his chest. When she returned, her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed a shadow. He kissed her forehead and pretended to be half asleep. She nestled against him, her hand resting over his heart as if shielding it. He closed his eyes, but inside the storm only grew stronger. The habit became impossible to ignore. It was no longer about curiosity. It was about the feeling of being shut out from a part of her life. A man who owned skyscrapers and companies who could walk into any room in the world and command attention found himself powerless in the face of a single locked door. And it terrified him. The question would not leave his mind. Why did she lock herself away every night after love? Why did she shut him out in the very moment he wanted her most? Why did the door between them seem heavier than all the doors he had ever walked through in his life? By the end of the month, it was no longer just a question. It was an obsession. And he knew that one night he would have to find out the truth. His name was Adrian Cole, a man who had built an empire from scratch and turned it into a global force. To the outside world, he was a billionaire, untouchable in his power, a symbol of wealth and authority, a figure who commanded rooms with his presence. But when he looked at her, when he listened to her soft laughter in the mornings, or watched her brush her hair by the window, he felt more human than he had ever been. Her name was Alara. She was not born into the same world of boardrooms and mansions. Yet she carried a quiet elegance that rivaled every jewel he could buy. Their meeting had been unexpected. He had gone to a charity exhibition, more out of obligation than interest, but she was there, standing by a piece of art. She had helped curate, speaking with passion about culture and memory. She was not like the women who normally surrounded him, the ones eager to be photographed by his side, eager to be part of his fortune. She spoke little, but when she did, her words lingered. He had asked her to dinner that night, and to his surprise, she hesitated before agreeing. That hesitation intrigued him more than anything. Months later they were together, but not in the shallow way people expected. He had fallen into her silence, her calm, her ability to bring stillness to a man who lived in chaos. To the world he was a storm, to her he longed to be a harbor. She gave him that, but she also gave him distance, a puzzle he could not solve. Alara rarely spoke about her family. When Adrian mentioned it, she would smile softly and say soon, as though that word could stretch forever. He had introduced her to some of his circle, though he noticed the way his relatives studied her with cold eyes. For them, love was never pure. It was always a transaction, and they searched for proof that she was like the others. Adrian hated it, but he could not change their gaze. His own mother kept silent. His uncle warned him subtly that the family name was too precious to be risked. He ignored them, but the weight of their disapproval followed him. And then there was her habit, that nightly ritual of locking herself away. Combined with her reluctance to speak of her past, it began to erode his peace. At first he told himself it did not matter. She gave him warmth, devotion, a gentleness he had never known. That should have been enough. Yet every time the study door closed, every time he heard the faint turn of the lock, a crack appeared inside him. He began to fear that what they had was not built on complete trust. Still he clung to her. He loved her in a way that frightened him. He had never given this much of himself to anyone. When they were together, the world outside vanished. In those moments he was not a billionaire, not the heir of an empire, but simply a man who wanted her. He needed her to need him just as much, without secrets, without walls. Alara, on the other hand, carried herself with quiet purpose. She cooked simple meals despite the chefs on call. She read in the garden when other women would have been shopping in Paris. She traced his hand absently when they watched the news. She seemed content with the smallest things. Yet Adrian knew contentment could hide storms. There were times he caught her staring out the window at night as if waiting for something that never came. Times when her smile faltered too quickly. He wondered then if love was enough to erase whatever shadows lived inside her. He tried to convince himself it was. But as the days turned into weeks, her silence grew heavier. The study became more than a locked door. It became a symbol of the part of her life he could not touch. For a man who had always opened doors with a word or a signature, it was unbearable to face one that would not yield, especially when it belonged to the woman he loved. At first he tried to laugh it off. Everyone has peculiar habits, he told himself, and perhaps this was simply hers. Yet as the night stretched on, the pattern became undeniable. Every time their passion faded into the quiet hum of the city outside, every time his body sought her warmth in the afterglow, she would rise and leave. The study door would close with that soft but deliberate sound, the turn of the key, like a note played over and over in a haunting melody. Adrian began to wait for it, not with patience, but with dread. The ritual unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He had grown up surrounded by routines of power board meetings, at dawn contracts, signed before lunch negotiations over dinner. He understood schedules, order the discipline of a man who built an empire. But this was different. This was intimate, personal, and it carried a weight he could not name. Sometimes she would be gone for 20 minutes, sometimes for nearly an hour. When she returned, she never offered an explanation. She would slide under the covers with her serene smile, press herself against his chest, and whisper that everything was fine. He wanted to believe her. He tried to bury his unease in work, in the demands of his companies, in the endless meetings that filled his days. But at night, when they were alone, the ritual returned like a shadow. He began to watch her more closely, the way her shoulders stiffened before she slipped out of bed, the way her hand lingered on the study door as if bracing herself, the way her eyes seemed distant when she came back, as though part of her had remained behind. One evening he decided to test her. As she stood wrapping her robe, he caught her hand gently and asked where she was going. She smiled in that calm way that both comforted and frustrated him. "I just need a little time to clear my thoughts," she said softly. "You make me feel too much and I need to breathe." It was said tenderly, as if it were a compliment, and it disarmed him. He let her go, though his chest tightened with unease. That night he lay awake long after she returned. He stared at the ceiling, replaying her words, trying to decide if they were honest or a carefully chosen shield. Another night, after a particularly intense evening together, he lingered by the wall. He pressed his ear against the cool surface and listened. At first there was nothing but silence. Then came the faint rustle of papers, the unmistakable sound of a drawer sliding shut, and a whisper too low to make out. His blood ran cold. Who was she talking to? What words was she speaking so softly? He stepped back before she returned, forcing his breathing into steady rhythm, feigning sleep when she slid beside him. But even as she rested her hand over his heart, he felt the distance growing. Each day that followed, the thought consumed him. At breakfast, he would watch her pour tea, wondering if her calmness was a mask. At dinners with friends, he noticed her silences more, her evasions when family was mentioned. She rarely spoke of her past, and now with the locked door every night, he wondered if she was living two lives. His friends noticed his distraction. One teased him, saying perhaps she was writing a diary of his flaws. Another, less playful, warned him not to be blind. Women come and go, but family and empire are permanent, they said. Adrian ignored them outwardly, but their words echoed in the chambers of his doubt. Nights became a battlefield between desire and suspicion. He longed to hold her without thinking, yet the moment her body left his side, suspicion consumed him. The study door became a wall inside his mind. He found himself standing before it one night, hand hovering over the knob, the urge to test the lock nearly unbearable. But he pulled away at the last second, afraid of what truth might wait on the other side. By the third week, the ritual was no longer something he observed passively. It was an obsession. He counted the minutes she stayed away, listened for every faint noise, memorized the rhythm of her return. He knew something was hidden within that room, something that explained her silence, her distance, her shadows. And he knew that if he did not find out soon, the questions would destroy him from within. Adrian's patience began to unravel as the weeks turned into a blur of unanswered questions. Each night the ritual repeated, and each morning he carried the weight of suspicion heavier than the last. One evening after a gala where whispers of his relationship circulated among investors and relatives alike, he returned home tense and restless. She was radiant at his side, yet he could feel the cold stares of his family still burning on his skin. In their bedroom, she touched his cheek, kissed him softly, and whispered that none of those people mattered. For a moment he believed her. Their lovemaking was urgent that night, almost desperate, as if both of them sought to drown the world, outside in the fire they created together. But when she rose again, robe flowing around her body, his chest tightened with frustration. The same door, the same lock, the same silence. He could no longer pretend it was harmless. He waited until the soft glow of light slipped through the crack beneath the door of the study. Barefoot, he stepped into the hallway, the marble cool against his skin, and leaned closer. This time the whispers were clearer. She was speaking to someone, but not on a phone. The cadence of her voice sounded like reading, not conversation. Words too soft to catch fully, but fragments reached him. Protect. Time. Must not fail. His jaw clenched. He moved closer, careful not to make a sound. A shadow moved across the crack of light, and the sound of paper folding followed. Then silence. He rushed back to bed, his heart hammering. When she returned, her eyes were red, though her smile tried to hide it. He kissed her forehead, pretending not to notice, but the storm inside him was roaring now. The next morning he searched for clues in the daylight. When she went into the garden, he entered the study quickly. The room smelled faintly of wax and old paper. On the desk lay scattered books and neat stacks of documents. He searched quietly, but found nothing damning, only notes written in her elegant hand lists of dates and clipped articles about his family. His stomach twisted. Why was she collecting information on them? Was it curiosity or something else entirely? He pushed the papers back into place before she returned, but the unease grew sharper. That afternoon, he confided in his closest friend Daniel, who had known him since university. Daniel listened quietly, then leaned back in his chair. "You need to be careful, Adrian. If she is hiding something, it might not be about love. It could be about power. You know your family. You know what is at stake." Adrian bristled at the suggestion. He loved her, yet, even in his defense, he could not silence the doubts. That night he watched her more carefully. Afterward, when she slipped into the study, he waited. Minutes ticked by. He rose, pressed his ear to the door again. This time he heard a drawer open, then the rustle of something heavier being set down. A whisper followed a plea almost. "Please let this be enough. Please let him never know." His blood turned cold. Him. She was speaking about him. He returned to bed quickly, his mind racing. She came back later, her eyes heavy, her lips pressing against his temple. He held her, but inside fear and longing tore him apart. Days later, while she was out running errands, he returned to the study in daylight once again. Determined, he pulled open drawers, flipped through books. Then he saw it. A folded envelope tucked behind a stack of ledgers, its edges worn as though touched many times. His name was written on it, but he dared not open it yet. He shoved it back just as he heard her footsteps in the hall. That evening she noticed something different in him. She asked gently if he was tired, if work had been too much. He smiled and lied, but the truth clawed at him. Something in that envelope was meant for him, but she had never shown it. One night his suspicions sharpened into near certainty. He lay awake as she left for the study. The whispers rose again, and this time he pressed closer. Through the crack, he caught sight of her bent over the desk, her hands trembling as she held a document. It was not a diary. It was a formal set of papers stamped with his family crest. His stomach dropped. He stepped back into the darkness of the hallway before she could sense him. His mind raced with questions. Why would she have documents bearing his family's seal? How had she even obtained them? He confronted her indirectly the next morning, asking why she avoided his relatives. She smiled and said, "They will accept me when the time is right." He looked into her eyes and saw both love and a wall he could not breach. Later that week, at a family luncheon, his cousin Ethan approached him. Ethan was sharp-eyed, ambitious, and far too interested in Adrian's personal life. He spoke in low tones. "That girl is not who you think she is. Be careful." Adrian bristled. Ethan smirked, then added, "Some doors are better left locked." The words chilled him. It was not coincidence. Ethan knew something. That evening, Adrian could not focus on work or conversation. He stared at Alara across the dinner table, her soft features illuminated by candlelight. she was the woman he loved, the woman who made him believe in gentleness again. And yet there was a part of her he could not reach, a door she would not open, a truth waiting in the shadows. By the end of the month, the whispers behind that locked study had become louder than anything else in his life. He knew it was only a matter of time before the truth broke through. Ethan arrived at their home one late afternoon under the guise of a casual family visit. Adrian had not invited him yet. He walked in with the confidence of someone who believed he had the right to cross any threshold. His sharp suit, his calculating smile, and the faint glint in his eyes carried a message louder than words. Elara greeted him politely, her tone calm, but Adrian felt her hand tremble slightly when she rested it on his shoulder. They sat in the living room, the silence heavy, until Ethan leaned forward. "You know the family does not approve of this, Adrian. You know what is at stake." Adrian stiffened, his jaw tightening, but Ethan was not speaking to him alone. His gaze shifted deliberately toward Elara. "There are agreements, documents, things she should have told you." Elara's face paled, but she said nothing. Ethan smirked. "That study of yours must hold interesting secrets, Elara." Adrian's chest constricted. He demanded Ethan explain himself, but Ethan only straightened his tie and said smoothly, "Some truths you will discover in time. For now, remember that love can be the sharpest liability." Then he left as suddenly as he had come. The air remained poisoned after his departure. Adrian turned to Elara, but she avoided his eyes. He wanted to press, but something in her silence begged him not to. That night she did not linger long after love. She slipped into the study, locking it quickly, her robe flowing behind her. Adrian's heart hammered as he listened. For the first time he heard not only her whispers, but the distinct sound of restrained sobs. He rose, paced, fists clenched, torn between breaking the door open and respecting her barrier. By dawn she emerged with swollen eyes and a fragile smile, whispering good morning as if nothing had happened. Adrian's world, however, had changed. The following day, Ethan invited him to lunch at a private club. Over wine, Ethan spoke with the ease of someone who enjoyed twisting the knife. "The elders of the family are concerned, Adrian. They want to protect the legacy. She does not belong, and you know it." He pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. Inside lay a document stamped with the family crest. It was a separation agreement signed by senior members of the Cole family. The terms were brutal. If Elara agreed to leave Adrian permanently within 30 days, she would be compensated with wealth beyond her imagination. If she refused, Adrian would lose his place in the succession, his shares frozen, his influence stripped. Ethan's voice dropped lower, his smile sharp. "She already has a copy, Adrian. The choice is hers." Adrian's hand trembled as he closed the folder. His blood boiled not only at the audacity of his family, but at the cruel position they had placed Elara in. Was this why she locked herself away? Was she hiding the weight of this impossible choice? He returned home that evening with a storm inside him. Elara greeted him at the door, her eyes tender but heavy. He studied her face, searching for answers. After dinner, when she retreated once more to the study, he lingered outside. He could hear her whispering her voice, broken, her words fragmented. "Forgive me, protect him, I will not sign." His heart twisted painfully. She was not plotting betrayal. She was protecting him, carrying the burden alone, shielding him from the cruelty of his own bloodline. He pressed his forehead against the wall, torn between barging in and letting her hold onto her fragile shield. When she returned to bed, he pretended to be asleep, but tears pricked his eye. Days passed, and Ethan did not relent. He appeared at Adrian's office at social events, always with that same knowing smile. He spread rumors, subtly whispering to board members that Adrian was blinded by love, that he was endangering the family. Adrian felt the walls closing in. Yet Elara remained steadfast. Each night she locked herself away with the cursed document. Each day she smiled gently, as though nothing was wrong. The contrast broke him. One evening, unable to hold back, Adrian confronted her. He caught her wrist before she reached the study and looked deep into her eyes. "What are you hiding from me, Elara? What is in that room that you cannot share?" She looked at him with tears threatening to fall. "Please, Adrian, do not ask. Not now. Trust me a little longer." He wanted to argue, to demand, but her voice cracked with such pain that he let her go. He stood in the hallway afterward, listening once again to her whispers through the locked door. The sound was not betrayal, but devotion, a vow spoken in secret. Still the deadline loomed. Ethan cornered him again, reminding him that only 3 weeks remained. His words were poison, designed to pit them against each other. Adrian returned home that night with a resolve hardening inside him. He could not let her bear this alone any longer. One way or another, the truth had to be faced. That night, the silence in the house felt heavier than usual. Elara had gone into the study after their intimacy, as she always did, and Adrian lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every nerve in his body alive with tension. He could not endure it any longer. When the faintest sound of her sobs reached his ears, he rose quietly. Each step across the cold floor, calculated as though he were trespassing into a forbidden world. The crack of light beneath the study door pulsed like a heartbeat, and he waited there for long minutes, his hand hovering above the handle. He did not turn it. Instead, he walked away and sat on the balcony, head buried in his hands, consumed by doubt. When she finally returned to bed, her face was calm again, the mask perfectly in place, but he saw the redness in her eyes. She curled into him, whispering softly that she loved him, but the words felt like both balm and blade. The following afternoon, an unexpected business call took Elara into the city. Adrian watched her car disappear down the driveway, then turned back into the house with determination. He walked straight into the study. For the first time, the door was unlocked. His pulse raced as he pushed it open and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of candle wax and aged paper. On the desk lay a stack of neatly arranged documents and clipped articles about his family. But what drew his eyes was a small wooden box, tucked half hidden beneath a folded shawl. His hand trembled as he lifted it onto the desk. The wood was old, its surface etched with faint marks, its lock delicate yet sturdy. He searched the drawers for a key, but found none. Then, almost without thinking, he pulled open the lowest drawer, and there it was, a slender brass key lying beside an unused envelope. His chest tightened as he picked it up, slid it into the lock, and heard the soft click. The lid creaked open. Inside lay the very document Ethan had shown him at the club. The separation agreement bearing the crest of his family, the signatures of his uncle, his mother, and 2 members of the board. The terms were merciless. If Elara signed, she would walk away with wealth, but would be forbidden from ever contacting him again. If she refused, Adrian would lose his inheritance, his control of the empire, his influence reduced to ashes. His throat closed as he scanned the pages. Folded beside them lay a letter written in her elegant script. With shaking hands he unfolded it. "My love," it began. "By the time you find this, perhaps you will know what they have asked of me. I could never sign, not because I do not want to protect you, but because leaving you would be the end of me. Every night I sit here with this paper, not to consider it, but to remind myself that our love is worth any cost. I would rather bear their hatred than your absence." Adrian's vision blurred as he read the words. The shadows that had haunted him suddenly shifted into light, painful and pure. She had not been plotting betrayal. She had been shielding him from the cruelty of his own bloodline, carrying a burden she believed he was too weighed down to carry. He pressed the letter to his chest, his whole body trembling. He sat there for a long time, staring at the box, at the cruel agreement, at the evidence of her selfless love. When the sound of her car pulling into the driveway reached him, panic jolted through him. He placed everything back exactly as he had found it, locked the box and returned the key to the drawer. He moved quickly back to their bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to steady his breathing. Moments later, she entered her hair, wind-tossed her smile, weary but gentle. She walked over, kissed his cheek, and asked about his day. He studied her face, fighting the urge to tell her that he knew that he had seen the truth she hid behind that locked door. But he said nothing, not yet. That night, when she reached for her robe, he caught her hand gently and whispered, "Stay." Her eyes flickered with hesitation, but she shook her head softly. "I just need a few minutes, please." He let her go, though his chest ached with longing and frustration. Once again I listened to the muffled sounds of her whispers, but now they were different. He understood now that she was not hiding sin, but offering silent prayers, holding on to the strength that kept her beside him. Yet knowledge did not ease his pain. It only deepened it, because now he knew she had been suffering alone. By dawn, he made his decision. He could no longer allow her to carry this burden by herself. He would confront Ethan, confront his family, and face the consequences, whatever they might be. For love had already cost her tears. It was time for it to cost him something too. That evening after dinner, Adrian could no longer endure the silence. He watched her clear the table with graceful movements, her soft humming filling the air, as if nothing in the world weighed on her shoulders. But he knew now. He had read her words, he had seen the cruel agreement, and the knowledge tore at him until he could not breathe. When she turned to go toward the study, he rose and caught her wrist gently but firmly. "Elara," he said, his voice low and trembling. "What are you hiding from me?" She froze, her eyes widening before she looked away. "Please, Adrian, not tonight. Not like this." He stepped closer, his heart pounding. "No more nights, Elara. No more locked doors between us. I saw the papers. I saw what they demanded of you." Her lips parted in shock, and the mask she always wore shattered. Tears filled her eyes as she shook her head slowly. "You were not supposed to see that. I wanted to protect you from it." He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Protect me? How does breaking yourself apart in silence protect me? How does carrying their threats alone protect us?" She sobbed, her body trembling against his touch. "If I had told you, you would have fought them immediately. You would have thrown everything away for me. And I could not bear to watch you lose everything you built because of me." He pulled her into his arms, his own eyes burning. Do you not understand? I would give up all of it before I would give up you." She clutched his shirt, crying into his chest. "You say that now, but your empire is your life. Your family will never forgive you. I could not live knowing I was the reason you lost it all." He kissed the top of her head, his voice breaking. "You are my life, Alara. None of the rest matters without you." The words shook her to her core. She pulled back slightly, her tears streaking her cheeks, her lips trembling as she searched his face for doubt. All she found was raw truth. She whispered through sobs. "Every night I sat in that room telling myself to be strong, telling myself not to sign no matter what they threatened. I thought if I could just carry it alone, you would be safe." He touched her lips with his thumb, his eyes fierce. "Safe in ignorance is not safety. Safe with lies is not peace. We are stronger together, not apart." She collapsed into him again, the sobs racking her body. For the first time he felt the full weight of her pain, the fragility she had hidden behind her calm demeanor. He held her tightly, vowing silently that no one would ever force her to face such torment alone again. The storm between them gradually softened into a trembling calm. They stood in the dim light of the hallway for what felt like hours, simply holding each other. Her tears soaking his shirt, his heartbeat pounding beneath her ear. Finally, she whispered, "I was so afraid you would hate me for keeping the truth from you." He lifted her chin, his gaze unwavering. "I could never hate you for protecting me, but I will not allow you to destroy yourself to do it. From now on we face everything together." She nodded weakly, a small sob escaping her throat, but for the first time in weeks, he felt the wall between them crumble. That night when they returned to bed, she did not rise. She stayed curled in his arms, her body trembling with the remnants of fear, but also with relief. For once the study door remained closed and unvisited. The whispers ended, replaced by the quiet rhythm of their breathing together. In the stillness, Adrian knew the battle with his family was far from over. Ethan and the others would not relent, but at least the battle would no longer be hidden behind locked doors. It would be fought openly side by side, and in that truth he found strength. The reprieve did not last long. Within days, Ethan appeared again. This time at Adrian's office, his tone sharpened with authority. He laid another folder on the desk and said coldly, "The deadline is coming. If she refuses to sign, the board will act. You will be stripped of your vote, your influence, and your inheritance." Adrian's jaw tightened as he pushed the folder back across the table. "I do not care about their money or their control." Ethan smirked, leaning closer. "That is easy to say now, but when the empire crumbles, when investors walk away, when your name is dragged through the mud, will she still look at you with the same devotion?" Adrian stood, fury burning in his chest. "Leave Ethan before I forget you are family." Ethan left with that same infuriating smile, but his words lingered like poison. That evening, Adrian told Alara everything. She listened in silence, her hands clenched together, her face pale. When he finished, she shook her head. "Adrian, they will not stop. They will destroy your reputation, your life's work. I cannot let them." He cupped her face firmly. "Listen to me. I would rather be ruined with you than rich without you. Do you understand?" Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "You will regret it." He kissed her fiercely, "Never." But Ethan was not idle. Rumors began to surface in the press. Whispers that Alara was a manipulator, that she had pursued Adrian for his fortune, that she carried a hidden past. Anonymous sources fed the fire and headlines followed. Adrian's advisors begged him to end the relationship to protect his brand. Shareholders demanded answers. Through it all, Ilara remained calm outwardly, but at night he heard her muffled sobs against his chest. One night she whispered, "Maybe I should leave. Maybe if I disappear, they will stop." Adrian pulled her closer, his voice harsh with emotion. "If you walk away, they win. Do not ever think leaving is the answer. We fight together or not at all." His determination gave her strength, but the pressure around them intensified. Invitations to events dried up. Former allies avoided his calls. At a board meeting, Ethan stood and declared that Adrian's judgment was compromised, that the family legacy was at risk because of a woman who did not belong. Adrian rose his voice, thundering through the chamber. "If my love for her disqualifies me, then take your legacy. I will build my own." Gasps filled the room. Ethan's face twisted in fury, but Adrian felt strangely free. Later that night, when he returned home, Ilara was waiting on the balcony. She had overheard everything. She rushed into his arms, tears streaming down her face. "You defied them for me," she whispered. He held her tightly. "I defied them because I cannot breathe without you." They kissed under the night sky, the city glowing beneath them, their hearts bound tighter than ever. But even in that moment of fragile peace, Adrian knew the war was far from finished. Ethan and the family would strike again. Harder, more ruthless. Yet for the first time, Adrian did not fear it, because now there were no more locked doors between them. Their love stripped of secrets was a shield, stronger than any empire. The storm reached its breaking point when Ethan arranged a private gathering of family elders and powerful shareholders intending to corner Adrian into surrender. Adrian received the summons and knew it was a trap, but he walked into the great hall with Ilara by his side, her hand trembling in his, yet refusing to let go. The room was filled with cold eyes, polished suits, and whispers that fell silent the moment they entered. Ethan stood at the head of the table, like a judge ready to deliver a sentence. He placed the separation agreement on the polished wood and announced that the time had come. Either Ilara signed or Adrian would be cast out with nothing. Adrian looked around the table, meeting each gaze steadily, then placed his hand over Ilara's. "She will not sign." The elders erupted in outraged voices, overlapping words like disgrace and betrayal, flying across the room. Ethan slammed his fist down. "You would throw away generations of power for her, for a woman you barely know." Adrian's voice cut through the chaos. "I know enough. I know she has more honor in her silence than all of you combined in your schemes. She did not come to me for money or power. You came to her with threats, and still she would not break. That is love, and it is worth more than any empire." His words left the room stunned, but Ethan sneered. "Then you will fall together." He gathered the documents and stormed out the elders. Following in a wave of mutters and condemnation, Adrian and Ilara were left standing alone in the cavernous hall. She turned to him, tears in her eyes, whispering that she could not let him sacrifice everything. He lifted her chin and kissed her softly, whispering back, "Everything is nothing without you." The days that followed were brutal. News outlets ran stories painting Ilara as a manipulator. Investors pulled away. Adrian resigned from several boards before they could force him out. But in the quiet of their home, something profound grew between them. With every loss he endured, she tried to pull back, to tell him it was not too late to let her go. Each time he silenced her with a look, a touch, a vow. I would rather be broken with you than whole without you. Slowly, the pressure began to shift. A journalist uncovered the truth about the agreement, leaked proof that the family had tried to buy Alara's departure. Public sympathy stirred. Stories of her quiet dignity spread. Strangers wrote letters praising her strength, her refusal to sell her love. For the first time, the tide turned. Adrian and Alara read those letters together at night, her tears falling onto the pages as she whispered, "I never thought anyone would believe me." He kissed her and replied, "I believed you from the moment you walked into my life." Healing began, not in boardrooms, but in the simple moments. Cooking together in the kitchen, reading in the garden, holding each other through sleepless nights. The locked study was never visited again. The box remained, but it was no longer a source of torment. It became a relic, a reminder of what they had overcome. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold, Alara sat on the balcony with Adrian beside her. She took his hand and said quietly, "I thought I was protecting you by suffering alone, but you showed me that real love is not sacrifice in silence. Real love is standing together, even when the world tries to tear us apart." He kissed her hand, his voice thick with emotion. "And you showed me that no empire, no fortune, no name matters compared to the woman I love." They sat in silence after that, listening to the city breathe below their hearts beating in rhythm. For the first time in months, peace felt real. The world outside still whispered, the family still plotted, but none of it mattered anymore. Because the door between them was gone. Their love, stripped bare of secrecy and strengthened by trials, had become unbreakable. And as the night settled over them, Adrian knew he had found the one truth worth living for. Weeks later, the world had quieted. The storm of scandal had passed into murmurs, and those who once condemned now watched from a distance with reluctant respect. Adrian no longer cared for their approval. He woke each morning with Alara beside him, and that was enough. One night after they had made love, he lay waiting for her to rise, half fearing she would return to the old ritual. But she did not move. She stayed curled against his chest, her breath warm on his skin. After a long silence, she whispered, "I do not need that room anymore." He kissed her hair, his heart tightening with relief. The study door remained closed for good, a relic of battles fought in silence. Instead of retreating, she shared her nights with him, fully laughter replacing whispers, tenderness replacing tears. One morning they stood together on the balcony as dawn broke the city, slowly waking beneath them. Alara leaned into him and said softly, "I used to think love meant protecting you by pushing you away. But now I know real love is letting you see all of me, even the broken parts." He turned her face toward him and replied, "And I used to think power and wealth defined me, but I have never felt richer than I do standing here with you." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes, but these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of healing, of release, of hope. In that moment, Adrian understood that they had both been freed. He had been freed from the prison of his family's expectations, and she had been freed from the weight of secrets and solitude. They had lost much, but what remained was unshakable. Later that evening, as they sat together watching the lights of the city flicker like stars, Alara rested her hand over his and whispered, Whatever comes next, I will not let fear drive me away again. He squeezed her hand gently, his eyes fixed on hers. And I will never let anyone stand between us again. They leaned into each other, then the world falling away. The future uncertain, yet theirs to claim. The locked room was behind them, but the door they had opened together led to something greater than either had known before. It led to a love that was selfless healing and unbreakable